What are your memories from before the war?
My memories from before the war, and I was 5 years old, are very pleasant. My parents were very well to do, and I had a babysitter full time, and we lived in a very big place, about 11 rooms, and I remember playing with friends, but mostly I remember is that I was taught Hebrew. I spoke Hebrew fluent by the age of 9, and I was surrounded by a loving family, my two sisters, my mother and father.
What was your first memory of the war?
My first memory was the war occurred on September 1, 1939. That is when the Germans invaded Poland. And I remember distinctly seeing German airplanes dropping bombs on my neighborhood. As a matter of fact, the bombing lasted about 2 weeks. And one day I decided not to sleep in my room, but to sleep with my older sister. When I woke up the next day, I went to my room and three-quarters of it didn't exist. And the sofa that I slept on was on the courtyard. We lived on the fifth floor. That is a real wake up that there is a war.
How did you manage to survive the war as a Jew?
That's surviving a baseball game as a batter with three strikes against you. As you know, Poland had a very large Jewish community, I think close to 2 million. And before the war, anti-Semitism was part of the scenery. The Poles are the biggest anti-Semites, at least they were in the 1940s. So the Jews were consolidated into a ghetto. I was in the Warsaw ghetto from the beginning to the end. The beginning was like January, February 1940, and the end of the ghetto was April 1943. That was the Jewish uprising. And I was just hiding with my mother from one place to another. When you say hiding, the Germans started rounding up the Jews about in 1941, and they were sent immediately to death camps. In other words, you were dead within 4 or 5 hours in the gas chambers. So as the Germans vacated one section, we moved into that section, hoping that they would never come back. However, they did come back once, and my mother and my middle sister were taken to the death camp Treblinka. About 8 months later, there was an uprising in Warsaw. The Jews staged a very small uprising that lasted 3 weeks. What I did with my older sister, we went through a hole in the Warsaw Wall ghetto. One thing to remember, the ghetto was enclosed within a wall. From there, we hid in 22 places. Each one was owned by a member of the Polish resistance, but we had to pay to hide out. I had many close calls, which means I was nearly caught by the Germans. But what made me survive was if I walk on the street, I always walk next to a German soldier. No one figured that a Jew would walk next to a German soldier. Plus, I had one thing going. When I was a kid, I had blonde and I was blue-eyed. I did not have any Semitic features. So that's how I survived, hiding in 22 places. Then in August 1944, August the 14th, I was liberated by the Russian army.
That's good.
What do you remember about the end of the war and coming to America, and did you have any other family members who survived?
The only other family member that survived was my father. He went to Russia at the beginning of the war, and the Russian gave him a choice to go back to Poland or go to the factories in Siberia. Well, he didn't go either way. Took him 2 years to cross Russia, and he wound up in India. In India, the English, who are very stupid, told him he's got to go back to Poland. His answer was, how can I go back? It's 1941. You, the English, are in war with the Germans. They said, you can't stay in India. Make a long story short, he took a freighter of all the places, Tokyo, Japan, and he arrived in Tokyo on December 6, 1941. As you well know, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The Japanese rounded up all Caucasian people and sent them to China to an internment camp. And there was no food there. The camp started off with maybe 6,000 people, maybe 2,000 survived. They all died of typhus and diarrhea and normal sicknesses. There were no doctors there. So he's the only surviving member of my family. And I saw him again in 1949. Now, getting back to me towards the end of the war, I was hiding in 22 places. The last place we had to hide was in the woods east of Warsaw, or to be more specific, east of the Warsaw River. I won't bother with you with the geopolitics, but in 1944 the Russians went up to the Warsaw River and made a stand there till January. The purpose of it was to let the Germans eliminate the Polish underground, which took orders from London. In August 1944, we were sent back east, away from the front. Then when the war was over, I made my way with my sister and some other friends of the family to West Berlin, where I stayed for 3 years. And then I emigrated to the United States. I came here May 1948, and then I followed the normal course. Army, first high school, college, then the Army. And here I am, 83 years old. Okay?
What did you do when you joined the Army?
When I joined the Army, I think it was early 1954. I went through basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I could never understand why I was made a fireman, which means I had to stoke all the fires in various barracks so the troops would stay warm. One day, after doing this for about 2 months, the commanding officer came and he said, "Get your gear together, you're going to Germany." So, in the army, no question, I packed my duffel bag and I went by boat to the French sector of Germany. From there, I was sent to Frankfurt, where I studied German technical words. Keep in mind, everyone in Poland speaks either Russian or German. I was fluent in German, native fluent. After that, I learned all the technical terms, electronic terms in German. I was sent to West Berlin and I became a handler of people, which means, as this was before the war, as the Germans defected, they had to go through West Berlin. Anyone that had anything to do with electronics was sent to me, and I asked him point blank whether he wants to go back and become a source for me in Germany. And I had a whole list of factories and things that the U.S. Army wanted to know. I was very lucky. I took over a network of 2 people, and when I left, I had 18. And I was only a sergeant, a lieutenant colonel took over my network. So I was very mad at the Army.
So that's
I was born January 1st, 1934, Warsaw, Poland. I lived in Warsaw, and the name of the street was Świętojarska, number 32. The neighborhood I lived in eventually became the ghetto because it was like 99% Jewish. My father's name was Leon Steiner, and my mother's name was Pearl Steiner. My older sister's name is Anya, approximately 10 years older than I am. My middle sister's name was Nusha, 5 years older than I am. We were pretty well off. I'm talking before the war. We had 2 Polish maids. There were 2 sets of dishes, milk and meat. All the religious paraphernalia. The family kept a kosher home. It was a religious family. When the war started, September 139, everyone thought that the war would be over in 2 or 3 weeks. After all, England will enter, the United States will enter with England, and Hitler will be gone in 3 weeks. And we have this beautiful apartment house in Warsaw. Why bother running? Why leave the furniture and the silver? People that didn't have much but had the foresight left and survived. There we were, the ghetto. With my own eyes, I saw the ghetto get smaller and smaller. The evacuations, the beginning of the roundups, they went to the railroad. There was very little resistance. I was 8 years old. I couldn't understand it. You hit someplace. We went to a warehouse run by the family that my sister was engaged to. Basically, when the Germans walked in during the day, they saw people sorting rags, and people were hidden behind the bales. I was in that situation probably from late 42 to April 43. My Polish name is Jurek. My mother asked my oldest sister, she said, "Why don't you take Jurek in the apartment and give him a bath?" My other sister, Nusha, stayed with my mother. We left, we just walked into any building. We boiled some water on the gas stoves, and we took all baths. The idea was to get up like 4 in the morning and go back to the hiding place. Next thing we knew, it was 10 o'clock. So we waited till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My sister ventured out. She says, "Let me go check if the coast is clear. She came back and she says the roundup is over and they took everyone from the hiding place. Mother is gone and Nusha is gone. That was it. Yom Kippur 1942. And you knew that they would be dead within 1 or 2 days. You just sat there, numb. After that, there was no reason to stay in a warehouse. Myself, my sister, and her brother-in-law, and a few other relatives of theirs just found a place, just walked in saying, we're going to make this our home. Now this was 42, choices had to be made. Who was going to leave the ghetto to the Aryan side? They decided that I would go because they were very Semitic looking. They had dark hair and dark eyes. They were condemned to die. Most of the Poles are blonde and blue-eyed. When I was a kid, I was a blonde. This was spring 1943. One day they said, let's go. My sister and myself went through the wall. We ran out of hiding places in Warsaw. We heard that a Polish person is willing to hide us for money. They had a big cellar, but we have to leave Warsaw. I had to take a train with my sister. We went to a little town known as Shinder. We got there in December 1942. This was the quietest hiding place because it was a house in the country and there was no one for miles. Already at that time we knew that the Germans would lose the war. We knew that the Russians would liberate us. All of a sudden we saw tanks, Russian tanks passing by. We finally decided it's time to come out of the cellar. We waved at them and they came towards us with their tanks. We realized that they were Russians, but they were Mongol troops from Mongolia. They did not speak Russian. They looked at us and they thought we were Volksdeutsche, which means Poles that became Germans. We understood. They said, you must be German spies. We're going to kill you. This was 1944. I was 10 years old. All of a sudden, we see a small car. A Russian comes out. He was an officer, and he spoke to them in their language. And he looked at us, and he said, Amhu. Amhu in Hebrew means our people. He was a Jewish Russian officer, and he made arrangements within minutes. We got on an armored personnel carrier and took us away from the front. August 14th, 1944. That's when I was liberated by the Russians.
Wondering if you had any legacy or message for the future for your grandchildren of what you've learned from the Holocaust or experienced.
I would like for them to know about it, to visit the places where it happened. How can you remember a thing like that, what happened? And what can you tell them? To say specifically what legacy? It was like a way of life that totally disappeared. You can't recreate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.